Scripture reading. Today readings from the speech made of Father Len Shine on October 19, 1978, 2,000 years ago in the little village of Bethlehem, Judea, which is known to no one, a great thought appeared. That was the thought that in teaching Jesus. Centered on that thought, centered on the salvation world, concerning the salvation world, God has carried out his will for 2,000 years. Now, once more, history has changed. Today, God is looking at a small nation of the Orient, Korea, as the birthplace of a new ideology for world salvation, an ideology which will establish kingdom heaven on earth. We must joyfully take on this task which God's giving us. This is precisely the way to eternal prosperity. Book of John, chapter 14, verses 9. Jesus answered, "Don't you know me, Philip, even after I have been among you such a long time? Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father." Adieu.
So good morning, everybody. Okay. You know how the Bible begins? One of the earliest quotes is, "Let us make man in our own image, in our own likeness, male and female." So I was thinking about that the other day, and I thought, you know, that's one of the greatest promises ever made. What could be a better promise than this? That you are like God. What kind of promise is that? You are like God. Isn't that great? Is God good? Try that again. Is God good? Yes. All the time. So are we good? Yeah, I know. Has God got it all together? Yes. Yeah. God's got. Everybody says God's got it all together, right? If you have a choice between being Henry and being God, what do you want to choose, Henry? Yeah, me too. I don't want to be Henry either. All right. So should we be good? Should we be good? Should we have it all together? Yeah, I know. You're going to hesitate to answer that, I know. Jesus said we should be good, right? Matthew 5:48. You should be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. So God promised us to be great and good, perfect like God. Jesus said we should be perfect. And then recently I heard something very interesting. Mother said, what color curtains are you going to have in the kingdom of heaven? You got to think about it. What kind of house are you going to live in? What kind of car are you going to drive? How are you going to decorate your house? Start thinking about all the details of living in the kingdom of heaven. I mean, nobody ever thought about that, but that's what we're supposed to be doing, right? So you got to think about the little things. The way you make your house changes the way you feel about life, the way you do things. So I thought about some of the things that I might want to think about if I'm going to be in the kingdom of heaven. So, will I be patient? Will I be kind if I'm in the kingdom of heaven? Or will I envy? Will I still envy? Or maybe I won't be rude if I live in the kingdom of heaven. Maybe I won't be self-seeking. Or maybe I won't be easily angered. Maybe I should put that on my list of things I want in the kingdom of heaven. Maybe I won't remember the wrongs that are done to me. Those kind of things. I should put those things on my list in the kingdom of heaven. How I'm going to be living. What kind of car I'll be driving. What color my car will be. I might have to put some things on my list for other people too, that I want them to do in my kingdom of heaven. Give me a raise, or early retirement, take care of some things. And of course, I think there might be some things other people want me to do on their list for the kingdom of heaven. In fact, I wrote some down here for Noriko. She might want to look at later what I want in the kingdom of heaven. So there's other kinds of signs we could look for the kingdom of heaven, other things you might want to see. Maybe how about no borders between nations? Maybe we could see a world where there's no borders in nations. How about a world where there's no drugs? People don't use drugs. If you're not using drugs, how should you get intoxicated? God's love. Father said you should be intoxicated by the love of God. We don't need drugs. I'd like to see a world, I put on my list here for no poverty. Everybody sharing equally the benefits of all the things that society has to offer. Everybody sharing and participating in the good things that life has to give us. So all those things these are things that we hear about all the time. Politicians talk about these things all the time. The drug problem, the immigration problem, the economic problem. Are these political problems? Or are they problems of the heart? Are they problems of the human heart? Do they have political solutions? There are no political solutions, because these are not problems from the politics. These are people problems. We know that we've seen people problems for a long time. Who can explain people problems? Who can explain history? Who can explain slavery that we saw in America? We saw slavery. We saw the mistreatment of the native population in America. We've seen all kinds of things. We've seen World War I, World War II. If you're old enough, you might have seen 2 or 3 wars. I've seen the Vietnam War. I was alive when the Korean War was on. I wasn't old enough to get drafted then, fortunately. We saw the war in Iraq. Everybody's lived through 2 or 3 wars. What happens in wars? That's right. You're allowed to kill people. It's considered good to kill. Is that good or bad? Doesn't work out well. It doesn't matter what country you're from. Everybody here, many of you are from another country. You have your own history. You all know your history. You know what you've done. You know what's been there. We're all burdened with the same problems. We've all seen behaviors that make us grieve in our hearts. So we have a promise from God to be great. But when Adam and Eve fell, we lost that promise. The fall of Adam and Eve, we lost that promise. So what did we lose when Adam and Eve fell? The first thing we lost was man's relationship to God. Adam and Eve lost their relationship to God. We lost our relationship to God. What's the second thing we lost when Adam and Eve fell? Adam and Eve lost the relationship to each other. Adam and Eve did not know how to relate to each other. I'm very sure that Adam spent a lot of time blaming Eve for being so nasty, and Eve spent a lot of time for blaming Adam for being so stupid. But I'm very sure they lost the relationship with each other. And what's the third thing they lost? They lost the relationship with their children. I know Cain and Abel grew up in a house where mom and daddy argued a lot. Because when Cain and Abel had a little disagreement about how to serve God, the solution was for Cain to kill Abel. They had no relationship. They had no way to understand how to relate to each other. Because their mother and father had no way to understand how to relate to each other, because they did not know how to relate to God. When Adam and Eve fell, God had lost his face. God lost his physical face on this earth. So the promise that we should become like God has been unfulfilled. God's face was lost. Because God lost his face, there's been so much confusion in this world. Like, who is my neighbor? Jesus told a parable in Luke. You all may be familiar with this one. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." That's good stuff. So Jesus said, "You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live. But here's the catch. But he wanted to justify himself. So he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor that I should love? In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. Of course, the priests and the Levites are the leaders of the Jewish society, the ones who lead the heart and soul of the people. But the Samaritans were not liked by the Jews. Jews didn't like Samaritans. Samaritans didn't like Jews. That's the historical background. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was. And when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? The expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, go and do likewise. So Jesus gave God a face in this parable. Jesus gave God a face. It was a good Samaritan, the person who was the enemy of the Jews. So when you give God a face, you behave differently. When you give God a face, you will end the confusion about who is your neighbor, who should you take care of, who should you love. You will end the confusion between people. Which race should we take care of? Which race should we love? Between nations. Which nation can we trust? Which nation should we deal with? You give God a face, and you solve all of mankind's problems. I'm sure you've all heard that, no God, no peace. If there's no God, we have no peace. But if you know God, if you have knowledge of God, then you can have peace. The question is, who knows God? Who knows God? I don't know God. Jesus said 2,000 years ago that he knew God. Jesus took that claim. He said that he is God's image, that anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. So Jesus himself gave God a face. And because of that, how did Jesus begin his ministry? What did he proclaim? The kingdom of heaven is at hand. That was how he began. Once God's face exists in this earth, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. So, when Mrs. Moon is asking us to prepare what we want to put in our room for live in the kingdom of heaven, what are we saying? The kingdom of heaven is at hand. It's very near. Prepare your linen. Prepare your furniture. Prepare your heart. Prepare your mind. So who knows God is the question, right? I remember one time Father proclaimed that there were 8 points that qualified him to be the Messiah. I don't remember all 8, but one I remember was that he knew God better than anyone else. And surely, until I met Reverend Moon, I 100% did not know God. I was just like everybody else. I did not know God at all. I'm not the only one who didn't know God. But when I read Father's words, I can start to know God. I can start to know God. Because without Father's words, you never know God. So I just wanted to share some thoughts, some things that opened my mind, might open my eyes. That God created all things as his objects to stimulate his joy. Joy was the purpose of God's creation. Just like any parent prepares beforehand for the birth of a child, God prepared for Adam and Eve. He created all nature merely as preparation for the sake of his child. Once those children were born and could appreciate all things, God could also appreciate them. In other words, by seeing his own children really appreciating the things he made, God could receive added joy. What does God pay attention to then? You say he is interested in heart, but heart is another chunk of material. Without love, even heart is nothing. God pays attention only to love. And the answer to why God created man is obvious. Unless you have the loving heart of God, you all look peculiar. And no matter how much makeup you put on, none of you could be beautiful in front of God. When love is dwelling within, everything becomes beautiful, even a tearful face. Your laughing face and crying face are actually quite similar, and in love, both are beautiful. Who in this universe shed tears first? The very people who brought the fall, Adam and Eve, or God, the Creator, who was seeing the failure of his own creation? The God of joy was transformed into the God of sadness. He tasted the first sadness and was the first one in the universe to shed tears. Adam and Eve first felt pain and sorrow when they were chased out of the Garden of Eden, and that day began the history of sadness. Nobody ever told me that God was sad. Nobody ever told me that God shed tears. Nobody ever told me that God felt as miserable as I felt until I heard it from Reverend Moon, who seemed to know something about God. The people do not even realize that God exists, that their own Father exists. Almighty God is waiting to help, but they don't even realize they are all the children of God. How lonely God must be. How much God's heart must be grieving. Can you imagine how lonely and aching God's heart is, looking at so many of his children enslaved in this world? Well, yeah, I didn't imagine that. But when I think about it, it starts to make sense. When I think about it, I start to feel something myself. When I read Father's words about God, I start to feel something because God makes some sense. I start to feel sympathetic for God. I start to feel empathetic with God because Father has sympathy with God and because Father has empathy with God. Compared to any other sermon that I ever heard any place, nobody could ever open my heart to God's feeling. Only when I read Reverend Moon's words. And of course, there's, these books are all full of so much true feeling about God's feeling and God's thinking. God's experience of the worst kind of suffering and tribulation was the beginning point of his restoration work. God feels the worst suffering and worst tribulation. Just putting a face on God that I never thought of before. Reverend Moon is giving God a face of a suffering father and a loving father. How miserable is God's inner heart as he watches his children lose their original privileged value of creation. What is our original What is our original privileged value of creation? What is our original privileged value of creation? What is that? That's the promise we talked about at the beginning, that we should be the image of God. That's our original. Why is that a privilege? What does the word privilege mean? Because elephants are not privileged to be the children of God. Dogs are not children of God. Only we are children of God. It's a privilege. So we lose our original privileged value of creation. We become like maggots and struggle in a life without value. I think a lot of people feel like they are struggling in a life without value. There are a lot of people. How many millions of people are running to America because they feel they are struggling in a life without value, in a miserable environment, and a life without value? So they run away to someplace better. That's evidence enough for me. Many people have that feeling. My father said, nobody knew God was so sorrowful. That is why I wept profusely for many days and weeks upon coming to know this. You should be aware that Unification Church began amid such profound circumstances. Okay. And it's not just talking about God that sets Jesus and Reverend Moon apart. They didn't just talk about God. When I think about it, was Jesus, was he at his best when he was raising Lazarus from the dead? Was he at his best when he was giving the Sermon on the Mount and inspiring many people, thousands of people? Or was he at his best when he was being nailed to the cross and he said, Father, forgive them because they don't know what they're doing? When Jesus does a great miracle, he raises somebody from the dead, I don't get any better. I'm not going to raise anybody from the dead anytime soon. It doesn't it doesn't improve me. If we look at that and think this is what makes Jesus great, then it's far away. Jesus is very far away. Never get any better. It says, Father said, so far in Christianity, we place God so high up in heaven and push man so low into hell. There has been an uncrossable gap between them. A wide and raging river has separated man from God. That's just not the way it should be. When Jesus is on the cross and he says, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do, I have to think about that. Because I can get myself killed. I can get myself angry. I can get enraged at people. I can have people try to hurt me. I can have people steal from me. I can have a lot of things bad happen to me. And I can become very angry. I can retaliate. I can strike back. But doing so would only multiply Satan's position and keep me in the same world. But if I think about Jesus, who could forgive people even on the cross, if I can think like that, if I can act like that, and here's a question, can I think like that? Can I act like that? Can I do it? Man, I wouldn't run for a pastor of this church. Of course I can do it. Can you do it? Well, you guys think you're a lot better than I am, that's for sure. Yeah, nobody say yes for me. Yeah, I can do it. You can do it. Will you do it? It's a tough question. Don't answer until you get there. But you have to know where you're going to go, what you're going to try to do when you get there. You have to know what color your curtains are you're hanging in your room there. So Jesus changes me by doing what I can do. And why can I do what Jesus does? Because I'm a man, and he's a man. So we all can do it. So come here 2,000 years later, and Reverend Moon again is giving God a face. And in the exact same way, Reverend Moon didn't just talk the talk. In his life, he also walked the walk. We know that. Of course, many people, we know his history, but there are some things that Father tells us, some things we think about all the time. We know he went to prison camp, communist prison camp, to be killed in prison camp, to be worked to death and starved to death. And he survived there for 3 years. Virtually no food, horrible working conditions, barely any clothing. That was what that's how they tried to kill him. And what did Father say? I never forgot when I read this. When I was in the most critical emergency of being tortured in prison, I did not want to pray to God about this miserable situation. While the situation was unnatural, I knew God was near. I knew his presence even without praying. So in the place where he was being tortured, being beaten sometimes, being starved to death, he knew God was near, even in that circumstance. And I've been in miserable places. I've been in miserable situations. I wonder if I said, God, why are you doing this to me? Or should I have said, God, I know God is near, because God is near. Do not be discouraged. Even though sometimes you feel that there is no God, know that he is always present. With that feeling, you must remember that God is with you. When you feel, oh, there's no God, I'm hopeless, I'm discouraged, nobody talks to me, even God doesn't look at me, you must feel God is close to you. You just make yourself feel it, closely watching you. In that hour when you would think that you are apart from God, say, my heart is full and rich. I have God. I am full of grace. I knew his presence even without praying. In that circumstance of being close to death, it was not difficult to feel that God wasn't looking at me or looking after me. But I definitely know that God was there and was preparing to deliver me in an unexpected way. When I was in tears, unexpectedly, God sent me comfort. Okay. I never forgot that simple thought, how to face your real world situation. Father worked like that in that situation. He kept his God's face all the time, and people listened to him. I know in America, Father went to Danbury Prison. Remember that? And we heard in Danbury, he was told specifically, you must not witness. You can't convert the inmates you're with. Okay. Nonetheless, many people in that prison followed Reverend Moon. He began praying 3 o'clock in the morning, and prisoners would join him in prayer at 3 o'clock in the morning. Now, maybe that was just a story, but I met some of those prisoners. One inmate that was with Father came to my little church center in Astoria, Queens, and told us about living with Reverend Moon, and that just his presence, his way, serving people all the time. He found ways to serve people. He cleaned the bathroom in the prisons. He set the tables for the prisoners. He played ping pong. He did all the things. He was just a regular guy with the prisoners, but they felt his love because he kept God's face he served them all the time. He served them, and they came to follow him. When he talked about God, they believed in God. I met that kind of person. Then we know Father went to, I remember back in the 70s, Father said, we're going to go to Moscow. Do you remember that? No, maybe not old enough. But Father said, we were having these rallies all over America, and Father said, we're going to go to Moscow. That was one I didn't look forward to. Got to go to Russia. This was a really communist country. We're going to go to Russia and start sweeping the streets and marching bands around and having God Bless Russia festivals. I thought that was going to be a little bit not work well. And so I was in a little bit of fear about what's happening. And yet somehow or other, in 91, we hear that Reverend Moon's going to Moscow to meet the president, Gorbachev, in Russia. Well, I don't know how that happened, but that was what he set out to do, and that's what he did. So then he met Gorbachev, and he said, I told Gorbachev to get rid of the statues of Lenin and Marx. In the history of the Communist Party, nobody except Reverend Moon ever said such a thing. The Communist Party leaders were all in commotion, saying, is he really speaking about Godism in front of us? How can he talk so arrogantly? No matter how much they may have hated me, today's communist world has become like that. The one whom they had feared most in the world has turned into their only hope. They have no other hope. So I taught them clearly, saying, listen to my words and follow me. Otherwise, there is no way to go forward. How proud God must have been of me, saying, I have always wanted to declare this to the Soviet Union. You are a great son. And actually, you read many words, but you have some things that stick to you, some things that you don't forget, some things that make more sense than others, and you can apply them in your own life. And they change your life, they shape your life, they make you who you are, I hope. So Father asked us, you have already heard the simple rule for meeting God. Compare which is stronger, your sense of hunger or your desire to meet God. When you love and miss someone, then compare that to the intensity of feeling towards God. If your feeling toward God is stronger, then you will know you have passed the test. Oh boy. Oh well. Still working, right? Nobody. Keep going. We could still make it. Oh, then God's desire is the same as man's and can only be fulfilled by the response of men. In the same way, man's desires can only be fulfilled when we receive a response from God. Our ideal lies in God, and God's ideal lies in man. Who wants to get a response from God? Who wants to have a response from God in their life? You can raise your hands. How would you like to meet with God? Actually, I've had of course, I had a lot of chances to have little experiences when I meet with God. I've had many experiences because we were looking for that. But Father said, when you walk, you can feel that God is walking with you, and the entire universe is walking with you. You can feel this. When you turn around, you can feel the entire world turning with you. That means you will become due north as far as the universe is concerned. Wherever you are will be the beginning point of movement in the universe. And wherever you are, you can relate with the rest of the universe. So I used to walk around fundraising, and I would tell myself, wherever I am is where God is. And that's how I kept myself going, because God was with me. You will never be separated. Everyone can have the dignity somewhere in his heart to feel on top of the world. Those who think they are just trash should be rebuked, because there is no such person. Everyone should feel the dignity of being like God and walking with God. Everyone should feel the dignity of feeling like God and walking with God. You can do that right now. And if you feel that God is walking with you right now, will you change the way you act right now? You will change the way you act, and you will change the way people around you act. You will change a lot of things, right? When you feel that God is with you right now. And He is with you right now. And there's also little things that Father told us how to do things in your life. And I remember in January 1st, 1977, when I heard Reverend Moon give the speech that was the kingdom of heaven on earth and the ideal family, and he talked about what you do with your kids. He said, "It is a beautiful scene when a couple of children come and want to sleep together with their father and mother. It's all right. Accept them. If there's not enough room, then you have to organize better. One sleeps with his head this way, one put his head over that way. The children may actually think it's uncomfortable to sleep between their big parents, but they feel good." So I remember that. And I determined, of course, I would have my children sleep in bed with me, which they all did. And as long as they stayed in the bed until they wanted to move out. And then they wanted to move out. And they did. And of course, they were better for it. They were stronger. And when they wanted to move out of the house, they moved out. They had no problem. But I thought that was the best way to treat my children. And so I did that. And there's a lot of other things that I have to do every day. When I'm at work, the way I talk to people, the way I treat people, I have to compare myself to God all the time. I have to compare myself to Reverend Moon all the time. And there's some people here from work who will tell you what a miserable boss I am sometimes. But I have to measure myself against God first, and then hopefully they will see that. So since the source of every problem has been the separation between God and man, the Messiah comes for one single purpose: to bring God and man into unity. This will solve man's problems, and this will solve God's problems. So do you think right now the kingdom of heaven is at hand? Because God's image is with us. You may say that the world is very big and there's a lot of problems out there. But the world has been very big for a long time. And 2,000 years ago, when Jesus was crucified, nobody was on his team. They were running from Jesus, everybody. But here we are 2,000 years later, and the world is influenced by Jesus because he was God's image. And the world is looking for God's image. They want to see God's image. Right now, God's image is with us. And we have the privilege of knowing God's image so clearly. We have the privilege of measuring ourselves against God's image. We have the privilege of changing ourselves to meet the definition of what it means to be God's image. And can we do that? Why not? That's of course. So get your curtains ready, right? Start planning what kind of room you're going to live in the kingdom of heaven. So what is the ideal world? Let's conclude. What is the ideal world that God created us to live in? The ideal that God wanted to see fulfilled through our first ancestors was for man and woman to become one and create an ideal family. Anybody here not capable of doing that? Isn't that wonderful? The place where parents and children, husband and wife, and brothers and sisters all want to join together in true love is the ideal family. So brothers and sisters, I hope and I pray that we are living in ideal families, or I hope and I pray that we are doing our best to be an ideal husband, wife, brother, sister, son, or daughter. Do your best right now, and God is with you. Thank you very much.